Some books I loved, some books I hated. Didn't read too many thrillers on my TBR this year. 2024 was definitely a year that I started a lot of series and didn't finish them. Beth O'Leary has a really good sense of humor, so I think that is the danger with the Groundhog Day trope. Unfortunately, this one I just didn't really enjoy either, and I had a lot of thoughts with this one. I don't know if this is an unpopular opinion. Was it necessary? No. What is the story? Just very odd. Hey guys, and welcome back to my channel, or welcome to my channel if you are new here. Apologies that this video is going up a little bit later into the new year, but hopefully you guys don't mind. As you can see by the title, we are going to be talking about the 61 books that I read in 2024. I am really happy with my reading journey that I went on in 2024. I definitely read a mix of books, different genres, some books I loved, some books I hated, some series I started, some series I finished. What I'm gonna do in this video is I'm gonna start by giving you guys a bit of an overall wrap up in terms of statistics, and then I'm gonna quick fire through the ones that I read from January to June, because I have already previously done a mid-year reading wrap up last year where I talk about those books in the first 6 months of the year more in depth, so I will leave that video down below. So after we've done the quick fire ones, we will talk about the books that I have read in the latter half of the year, and I'll give you guys a quick little plot synopsis, and then I will also be reading you guys my thoughts from my reading journal. So my reading journal itself will be an entirely separate video. It is going up a little bit later because it has taken me a lot longer to do my reading journal than anticipated. I always forget how long it takes to do all the spreads, so that video is also coming. Also, some of the books I don't have my copies anymore, either because I didn't like it or because they're currently on loan to friends, so I'm just filming with the ones that I have. So I've got the stack here to the side that you guys can see. I've also got a stack on the ground here, and then I've also got this big stack here on the ground as well that I used in my thumbnail. So there is a lot of books to talk about. So without further ado, let's jump into this video. So let's start off with my reading goals and how I went on those, and then we'll go into the statistics. My reading goals that I had for 2024 was that I wanted to read 55 books. Obviously this I have smashed because I read 61. I had read 5 classics. I did not do this. I read 1 classic last year. Read 5 Christian non-fiction books. That one I did actually achieve, so we will talk about that a little bit more in depth in a second. I said that I wanted to cut down my thriller genre by half. I did not do this. I didn't read too many thrillers on my TBR this year. I read a few, but I also got some out from the library as well. I said that I wanted to continue to read 1 newer book that I've purchased, followed by 1 older book. I don't know if I've done this. Maybe I have, but I also read a lot of library books, so it's kind of hard to tell. I feel like in the latter half of the year I was better at doing this. I read 61 books. I read 20,114 pages. I also listened to 1,107 minutes of audio. So I started listening to some audiobooks in December. Most of these books here are physically read. There's only 2 that are audio. I read 15 romance books, 15 fantasy books, 10 Christian non-fiction, 2 non-fiction, 1 classic, 7 science fiction / dystopian books, 6 mystery / general fiction. I did those together, and 5 thrillers. So I feel like that's pretty good for my genre breakdown. Romance and fantasy are literally tied because they're the 2 types of books that I read the most. I completed 4 series, which, to be honest, I wanted to complete more. 2024 was definitely a year that I started a lot of series and didn't finish them. I read 45 books out of the 294 that were physically on my TBR at the start of the year. So I feel like overall that's pretty good, considering that I have read 61 books, and out of those 61, 45 were from my physical TBR. So I'm really happy with that. I read 14 books out of the 24 books that were on my 24 books to read in 2024. So again, over half, not bad, but also not great. I have read 9 books out of the 75 books that I had bought in 2024, so that's obviously not great. In January, I read 7 books. In February, I read 6 books. In March, I read 7 books. In April, I read 4 books. In May, I read 5 books. In June, I read 4 books. In July, I read 5 books. In August, I read 4 books. September, I read 4 books. October, I read 4 books. In November, I read 3 books. In December, I read 7 books. Now we will get into all of the books. So if you haven't by this point grabbed a beverage and a snack, definitely grab one because this video is going to be a long one. I'm going to go in order of the books that I read them. So let's start off with January. A Court of Wings and Ruin by Sarah J Maas. This is the 3rd book in the ACOTAR series. If He Had Been With Me by Laura Nolan. I do want to get a physical copy of this book, but this was one of the library picks that I had. Crazy Love by Frances Chan. Waste of a Life by Simon Brett. This one I do not need a copy of. Again, it was a library book. A Court of Frost and Starlight by Sarah J Maas. This is the 4th book in the ACOTAR series, and it's like the little Christmas holiday novella. Shatter Me by Tahara Murphy. And Beach Read by Emily Henry. I do have a physical copy of this. My sister is just currently borrowing it at the moment. Now we will move into February. Love, Life and the List by Casey West. I don't need a physical copy of this book right now. Wildfire by Hannah Grace. This is book 2 in the Maple Hills series. The Screwtape Letters by C.S. Lewis. Fourth Wing by Rebecca Yarros. This one actually was originally a library book that I read. Then I bought a physical copy of it because I really enjoyed it. Radio Silence by Alice Oseman. This one here I don't need a physical copy of. And Compared to Her by Sophie DeWitt. Now we will move into March reads. Shadow and Bone by Leigh Bardugo. This is the 1st book in the Shadow and Bone trilogy, which is part of the Grishaverse. 5 Survive by Holly Jackson. The Night Circus by Erin Morgeston. This book I ended up charitying. The Ruthless Elimination of Hurry by John Mark Comer. This book I also ended up charitying. The 7 Year Slip by Ashley Poston, or Poston, depending on how you say it. The Wedding by Nicholas Sparks. Again, I ended up charitying this. And Destroy Me by Tahara Murphy. This is the 2nd book in the Shatter Me series. It's a little novella. I read it on my sister's iPad, and this one here I do want to get a physical copy of. Alright, now we will go into April. The Desolations of Devil's Acre by Ransom Riggs. This is the last book in the Miss Peregrine's Home for Peculiar Children series. So it's book 6, 24 Hours by Greg Iles. This one I ended up charitying. Archer's Voice by Mia Sheridan. I do have a physical copy of this. Again, my sister is just currently borrowing it. And Enjoying God by Tim Chester. Alright, now we will move into the books from May. We have The Mortal Instruments, City of Bones by Cassandra Clare. This one is the 1st book in the Mortal Instruments series. So again, like the 1st book in the like Shadowhunters universe. The Block by Ben Oliver. This is the 2nd book in the Loop trilogy. I do have a physical copy of this, but my best friend Rachel is currently borrowing this at the moment. Legally Blonde by Amanda Brown. Gentle and Lowly by Dane Ortland. And Confess by Colleen Hoover. So now we'll just move into the books from June. The Mortal Instruments, City of Ashes by Cassandra Clare. So again, this one is the 2nd book in the Mortal Instruments series. Powerless by Lauren Roberts. This is the 1st book in the Powerless trilogy. Christianity on Trial by Colin Chapman. And The Girl Who Fell from the Sky by Emma Carey. So all of those books were ones that I again had talked about in my previous mid-year reading wrap-up. So now we will go into the books that I read in July. The Road Trip by Beth O'Leary. I wanted to pick up another Beth O'Leary book because I really enjoyed The Flat Share. I read that last year and absolutely loved it. So this book here is a romance book. It has a past and present timeline, and you are following these friends who are on a road trip to a wedding, but when they were driving there, another car crashed into theirs, and the guy driving the other car is this girl's ex, and so they're kind of like forced to share a car and basically go on a road trip because this ex was also going to this wedding. So very intriguing premise. So obviously like you get the past timeline of their relationship, and then you get the present timeline of them obviously not being together and trying to work out how to be in this situation comfortably together. So this one, I said that I preferred the present timeline over the past. I love a book that has a road trip in it, so I think that's why I enjoyed the present timeline more. The relationship in the past timeline felt a little bit insta-lovey, so I didn't fully, I guess, believe in their chemistry. I said that I wish they had built up their friendship a little bit more to start with, but in the end I did believe in their chemistry. This one was also our book club pick for June. I ended up finishing it in July just because I got really busy. I really enjoyed the side characters, and the humor was a 10 out of 10. It had me giggling. Beth O'Leary has a really good sense of humor, so if you want a book that's going to make you laugh, I would pick up any of Beth O'Leary's books. So I've mainly kept it on my shelf because I really enjoyed the present timeline, and just as a reference, I am only keeping books on my shelf that I would like recommend to other people. Next is just a boring book. It's a non-fiction book, but I had to read this textbook for my law class. Aotearoa New Zealand Legal System Structures and Processes, the 7th edition, so pretty boring but just very insightful for my law degree. Before I Fall by Lauren Oliver. This one is a YA romance book. I had watched the movie of this. It's kind of like that Groundhog Day trope where you have like the same day over and over again. So this girl here, she is kind of like living her just like high school life. She is in the popular group, which is quite interesting. So I feel like a lot of the time you don't get the popular group, you get kind of like the outcasted group. And she goes to a party, and then on the way home all of her friends and her are in a car accident and she dies. That's not a spoiler because I think it's on the back of the book, and you get the Groundhog Day of her reliving this day to try and figure out why she died, and also to see if there's any way that she can avoid dying, basically. So this one here I obviously didn't keep. I charitied this. It was a bit young for me. I said I wasn't very attached to the characters. I felt like the story wasn't progressing. Because of that, it was a bit of a drag to get through. I think that is the danger with the Groundhog Day trope, is that it can feel very repetitive. For me, when I was reading it, I didn't feel like we were getting anywhere. I said also, just as a side note too, that I kind of found the movie a little bit boring, but I wanted to see if the book was any different, and unfortunately it just wasn't. I made a note to check the trigger warnings if you are wanting to go into this book, because it does deal with some pretty heavy topics at times, and I also didn't enjoy the side characters, so that one was a bit of a struggle. Layla by Colleen Hoover. I really wanted to read something that I thought I would enjoy, and unfortunately this one I just didn't really enjoy either. This is a thriller book. It's one of Colleen Hoover's thrillers. You are following this guy and he is in a relationship with Layla, and then one day Layla has an accident, and when she comes out of the hospital, just all these very strange things start happening. She starts acting like really strange, and so the guy is just trying to figure out what is wrong with Layla, basically. A little bit like twisty turny and things like that, obviously. It was written well, but the plot just wasn't for me. There was something in the twist that I was like, I don't quite like that. There was a couple of thrilling scenes, but it felt more of a mystery romance with a thriller subplot rather than like a thriller, and I was in the mood for a thriller, like a bingeable thriller. It was different to what I had assumed and not as good as Verity. Unfortunately, it just fell really flat, so I ended up selling this book. So the last book that I read in July, I tackled A Court of Silver Flames by Sarah J Maas. This is the last book in the ACTA series. This one is the first book that is not told from Feyre's point of view. In this book here, you follow Nesta. Nesta is one of Feyre's older sisters, and everybody hates on Nesta, but I think as an older sister myself with two younger sisters, I kind of enjoyed Nesta's character. She is very, very grumpy, and I think personally what I've found is that I really enjoy in books when the female is grumpy. I do not know why, but it just seems to click in my brain, and with her being an older sister and having 2 younger sisters, I was like, girl, like, I feel you. So I can't really like talk too much about what happens in this because obviously it follows along from what happens in the ACOTAR series, but you also get a little bit of Cassian in this book, and Cassian is the main love interest's like best mate, basically. And I had a lot of thoughts with this one. This one I said that I really enjoyed. It was in 3rd person, which is very different. You are also able to understand these characters' emotions and feelings really well. I loved the plot, but it's definitely very spicy and could have done with a few less of those scenes. I am not a huge lover of spice in books. I don't mind if there's like 1 or 2 of those kind of scenes, but as soon as it's like very consuming, I tend to not like it very much. And there is a lot of spice in this, like a lot. So if you're going into the ACOTAR series, just be mindful with this last book in particular. It is very spicy, so if you don't like spice, you will not like this last book. I said that the ending and the side characters were good, written well with really good quotes. It didn't feel like a 750 odd page book, and it went really fast. There was so much character development and growth, and I think this plot in this book is probably one of my favorite plots in the ACOTAR series. I think if I was going to rate the ACOTAR series, I would rate A Court of Mist and Fury as number 1. Then, to be honest, probably this one at number 2. Then probably the first book, A Court of Thorns and Roses, at number 3. Then probably A Court of Wings and Ruin. And then probably A Court of Frost and Starlight last. I absolutely love this series. It's one of my favorite series of all time, and it is definitely worth the hype. So if you've been hesitant to start the ACOTAR series because you're not sure if it's worth the hype, definitely read it, because it's pretty easy to get into and understand as well. It's not a very complicated fantasy world. Now we'll go into my August reads. So the first book I picked up in August was Things We Never Got Over by Lucy Score. This one was actually our July book club pick, but I just didn't get to it in July. This one is the first book in the Knock 'Em Out series. So Knock 'Em Out is like the little small town that they are in. So in this book here, you are following Knox and Naomi. Knox is grumpy and Naomi is like the golden retriever. And I don't love it when guys are grumpy in books. I prefer it the other way around, but I really enjoyed Naomi's character, so that's why I have kept this book on my shelf. So this one here, you are following Naomi, and she has just ended a relationship and she's ran off to the small town called Knock 'Em Out because she got a distressed call from her sister. But when she gets there, she finds that her sister is nowhere to be seen and has left her, I think she's 11, her 11 or 10-year-old daughter just abandoned. So Naomi kind of like takes this role of like mother, and you kind of just follow her and the child, which is Waylay. So you follow Naomi and Waylay as they kind of just like build this friendship, and Naomi's kind of like finding her feet again after this relationship ended, and then she obviously meets Knox and the story kind of goes from there. So these are my thoughts. I don't know if this is an unpopular opinion, but I really don't like Knox. Like, he was mean and controlling and really needed to work on himself a lot more before he got into a relationship. That's just me personally. Other people might really like him and think he's misunderstood, and he's definitely like been through a lot and has like a bit of trauma. I just feel like he wasn't someone who was ready to emotionally be in a relationship at this point in time. I don't like the baby pet name. I don't like it when people call each other baby in books. I can deal with babe, but baby just like, my husband and I don't even call each other that because it's just gross. I said that it had a good plot. It was dual POV, and I loved Naomi and I loved the side characters. I especially love Joel and Steph. They are two of the best characters in this book other than Naomi. It was good humor, it was very, very witty, and I loved the small town and I could really picture it. So that's kind of why I kept it. It did have a lot of pluses, really nice small town, a really fun plot, but yeah, I just wish we had a different guy in this book. Next up, I did a reread of If I Were God, I'd Make Myself Clearer by John Dixon. So this one here, my little Bible study group that Phil and I kind of ran, we reread this book together. So that's just like us and two other guys. And it was really, really insightful. Like, I definitely got a lot out of this the second time. Obviously very substandard by the title with what it's about, but basically it is just going through why God doesn't seem to be very clear that he exists. As someone who is a Christian, I feel like it's very obvious, but as someone who isn't a Christian, I could understand why they would feel that God isn't making himself very clear. So yeah, this book was really good. I said that it was just as good second time. Addresses how we can see God and how other religions stack up to Christianity. It is very, very dense though, so even though it's just over 70 pages, there is a lot of information in this. Powerful by Lauren Roberts. So this is the little novella that comes after Powerless and comes before Reckless. This is also an unpopular opinion because I know a lot of people didn't like this, but I really loved this story. Was it necessary? No, but I really, really liked the character in this. So in here you were following Peyton's best friend as she kind of stays back in the town that Peyton grew up in while she is prepping to go in these trials, and you are following her as she is a seamstress. And I really, really enjoyed this. It's a very short book, so it was really, really easy to fly through. Okay, my battery just died, so I've just changed it over to another one. This book here, I actually think you could do a tandem read of this with Powerless if you didn't want to read them like separately, because this one follows the same timeline as Powerless. So I've actually written a little timeline if you wanted to do it as a tandem read. I really hope that this will kind of match up. As I was reading it, I was kind of like double checking it. So I said you can read Powerless until Peyton goes to the trial, then read Powerful up until chapter 11, then jump back to Powerless and read it until the first ball scene, and then you can kind of read them in tandem until the last trial, then jump back into Powerful and read chapter 19, then jump to Powerless and read until just before the last scene in the trial, then read Powerful chapter 21, and then tandem the rest until the end of the book. So obviously that doesn't really mean much unless you kind of go into the series, but if you wanted to tandem read them, that's the way that I would suggest you tandem read. Hopefully it'll kind of all make sense as you're reading. This one was also a new release, I think last year. I absolutely loved. Great banter, very witty, good characters with a good plot. And then I just said that I think the best reading experience of the series would be to read this book in tandem with Powerless. It was short and sweet, and I enjoyed having the powers at the front. So I really hope she continues doing this with the rest of her books. At the front, you kind of have a breakdown as to what everyone's powers are and who has what powers and the record of all of those powers. I feel like it would have been helpful if we had that in the start of Powerless. My memory is really, really bad. So like sometimes when it would say a power, I'm like, oh, what do they do again? And then like as I would read, it would kind of explain what they're doing. I'm like, oh, that's right. So having them at the front is really, really helpful for me. The next book I did actually DNF, and it takes a lot for me to DNF a book because I don't like DNFing a book. Before I Die by Jenny Downham. I got up to page 119, so I did give it a really, really good crack, but I just said, what is the story? No plot. Scenes abruptly end with no follow through. Every character is unlikable. Basically, the plot that I did gather from it was that a girl was dying. So again, she has like some sort of disease. So definitely check the trigger warnings if you're wanting to go into this. And the two things that she desperately wants to do are have sex and try drugs. And I just said, literally I wrote, like, no. Like, you are literally on your deathbed, and the two things that you have on your bucket list to do before you die is to try drugs and have sex. Like, No thank you, kind sir. I couldn't get through it. It was really boring. It would kind of build up a scene and then you'd have like a tiny bit of that scene and then it would just abruptly end, and I'm just like, cool. So I just didn't waste my time with it anymore. So then after that, I just really wanted to read something that I thought I would enjoy. I went into Delirium by Lauren Oliver. So this one here was actually our book club pick for August. So for August, we did a thing where my sister would pick me a book to read that she really enjoyed, that she thought I would like, and then I would pick a book for her that I have read and really enjoyed and thought she would like. So my pick for her was ACTA and her pick for me was Delirium. This one is a YA dystopian book. It is the first book in the Delirium trilogy, and in this book here you are just following this chickie who lives in a world where love is a disease. On your 18th birthday, you are put through this kind of like surgery thing to remove all traces of love in your body so that you can be like the best functioning person that you can in society. And their kind of philosophy is that like love is a disease. It makes you like react insanely to things. It's a very like strategic society. Like you are kind of placed in a home that will kind of be like the best outcome for society. You'll produce like smart children. This book here, I said that I loved this. I said it was a little bit predictable in places, but it was very fast paced and it felt very high stakes. And especially the last 20 pages, there was so much in them and it was so action packed. A lot of tension throughout the whole book. I said it had me giggling, stressed, like I felt pretty much every emotion that you could feel while reading this. I loved the side characters and I really enjoyed the plot. It was very different, and I just said I'm looking forward to the rest of the series. It was well written and it kept my interest the whole time. I love a good dystopian series, and so I'm really excited to continue this series in 2025. Now we will go into my reads for September. So the first book that I read in September, I actually started off having it as a library book, and Phil and I were going away for his birthday and my date that I needed to drop back the library book would have ended halfway through our trip, so I had to kind of push it forward, and I didn't realize that I had to push it forward, and I was really enjoying the book, so I just ended up going out and buying a copy so I could return the library book but also keep reading it while we were away. Tress of the Emerald Sea by Brandon Sanderson. So I got this recommendation off of Rachel Catherine and I really enjoyed this book. Basically, you are following Tress and the love of her life has been taken, and so she goes on a quest and ends up on this pirate ship to try and find the love of her life, basically. But it kind of doesn't focus on the romance a lot. It kind of just focuses on like Tress learning to kind of like step out of her comfort zone and go on this journey. Along the way, she kind of like learns a lot about herself. And it's also like very out of character for her to just drop everything. Like it's quite like a dangerous quest. It also has a talking little side character in this book, so it kind of reminds me, is it the crab in The Little Mermaid? That's like the little talking side character thing. I think in this book it was a talking rat and I loved him. He was quality. So this one here, it is more of a like cozy fantasy with like a romance subplot. This one, I said that it was very different, almost like second person, because you aren't being told the story as Tress, you are being told the story by like a narrator who's kind of like explaining what Tress is doing, but also there would be like reference to themselves as they were telling the story. And as the story kind of goes on, you find out who is actually narrating the story. So a very different way to write. I thought it was really cool. I've never read anything like that before. I said that it gives very fairy tale vibes. I really enjoyed the characters, but there was quite a lot to remember. Maybe it would have been helpful to have something at the front that said who the characters were, but then I don't know if that would spoil the story or not. I had good character development and I enjoyed the setting of being on the sea. I definitely want to read more books that are set on the ocean because I love the ocean. It is one of my like happy places. It's one of my safe spaces. It's one of the places I feel at peace. So reading a story set on a boat was really fun. I enjoyed the author's note too, explaining the process of writing the book. The story had me giggling, I did guess the first plot twist, but I had the wrong person. It did take me a while to get through, as this book has like really small writing. I don't know if you guys can see there. And I loved that Tress had a cup collection because it kind of just like gave her a little bit of personality. So I would highly recommend this if you want just a little cozy fantasy to get into. It's also a very easy fantasy to start off with, so if you're very new to fantasy, I'd highly recommend going into this. Teach Me to Feel by Courtney Reesig. So this is a Christian non-fiction book where you go through the Psalms and it kind of just takes you through a different Psalm each day with a different emotion, and you kind of unpack that emotion a little bit and kind of learn how to feel that emotion biblically. I really enjoyed this. It touches on a lot of emotions and what the Christian response to them is, and it's very biblically based, obviously going through the Psalms. I said it's definitely one that I will go back to and reread, and it also has very short chapters as well, which is really helpful. It also has extra reading at the end, so if you want to read more if you're really struggling with that emotion. And then it also has a page where you can like write down your thoughts. I didn't fill out the little journaling part because I don't like writing in my books, and also I lend my books out to other people a lot, so I didn't want to like lend out something which had all my like thoughts and opinions and how I was feeling in that exact moment for then someone else to read. But I would definitely recommend this whether you're Christian or not. Like if you're just struggling with things, I definitely recommend it, just because it can bring you a lot of comfort. Legend by Marie Lu. This one was a library book, and I had it on my list to buy for a really long time, but then I saw it in the library and thought I would just give it a go. So this one is a YA like dystopian science fiction trilogy. This one here, I think you are following Day, who is like the main guy, and there's also a girl that you're following, and I think she is hunting Day because she believes that Day killed her brother, and they meet and they're kind of like working together to like help her try and find this guy, but she doesn't know that it's like him that she's trying to find. And they live in like a dystopian time, and it definitely talks about class a lot between like the rich and the poor. I said that I had felt a little bit slumpy and overwhelmed when I read this book, so I feel like it kind of hindered my reading experience of it. The book was slow at times, but I enjoyed the last 60 pages as they were really fast paced. It was a dual POV between Day and the main girl. You have two separate stories that kind of interconnect, her kind of like hunting him and him trying to like escape while also I think trying to clear his name. I said that I felt like the story would have been stronger if they had focused on one over the other, because there was just kind of like a lot going on and it kind of felt like a little bit messy at times. I hope that the second and third book in the series will be stronger. Overall, the dystopian world could have had more depth to it. So I'm kind of on the fence about whether I want a copy of this book or not. I think I need to read the other two books in the series to kind of work out my thoughts overall. The last book that I read in September is Bunny by Mona Awad. Now I read this after Legend because I was like, I really want to go into a book that I feel like I will just binge and like kind of not know what's going on, but really enjoy. I don't have my copy anymore. I ended up selling my copy of this. This book here is kind of like a fantastical horror, so like very different from what I've read, and it's just very odd. I can't really describe the plot to you other than you are following this girl who goes to this like school, and she kind of observes this group of girls and they give the vibes of like a cult. They call each other Bunny. No one really knows what happens in their little friend group because people don't really get invited to their friend group, but also everyone just describes them as very odd. They dress very odd, they speak very odd, their voices are always like really high pitched, but it's just very strange. I had a lot of thoughts with this one. So my overall thought though for this book was that I did not like this book. I feel like with this book you will either love it or you will hate it. My best friend Rachel wanted to read it originally, and then she was like, you read it first and then I'll read it after you. But then I read it first and I kind of told her a little bit about it, and I just said, I do not think you are going to like this, and so she didn't end up reading it. I had a different expectation as to where I thought the story would go, and it just did not go anywhere near where I thought it would go. But I liked the idea of it, but the execution for me didn't hit. It's also one of those books that kind of has like an open ending, like you decide kind of what happened, and I don't really like those kind of books. I like to know like for sure what has happened. I felt like the plot was going around in circles a little bit. I didn't like how much drinking was portrayed in the story. I kind of have to go on Reddit afterwards and see what other people are saying about the story. It felt like a child wrote the book but then added horror elements, because a lot of the metaphors and stuff and like the similes like didn't make sense to me. It would be like, this is a real random example but it's kind of fitting. It would be like oh, her skin looked like a pink cupcake with strawberry frosting, or like she was standing over there like a flamingo at the zoo. It was just the most random metaphors that like just didn't make any sense. It's pretty like gory. It's so odd. I don't know how else to describe it. I said that it was difficult to get through as well for me. Quite frankly, I was really happy to get rid of that book and get it off my physical TBR, and to get it like off my physical TBR, if that makes sense. Then after that very interesting read, we hit October and I just wanted to read something that I had thought that I would enjoy. So I went into Divine Rivals by Rebecca Ross, and I loved this book. This was exactly what I had needed after reading the atrocity that was Bunny. This one here is a YA fantasy book where you're following Iris and is it Rowan? Basically, these guys are rivals at the same kind of like journalism company. They're kind of like fighting for the same promotion, and Iris kind of comes from like a pretty tough home life, and I think it's Ronan comes from a more like wealthier home life. Iris one day is writing these letters on her typewriter just to kind of like get her thoughts out and stuff, and she's putting them under her closet door just because that's what like her nan used to do. And one day she opens the door to her closet and all of the letters are gone, and she believes that they are going to her brother who is fighting in the war, because there's also like a war going on that has like two sides where like two different like gods are like fighting against each other, and you kind of join one side or the other. But little does she know that these letters are going to Ronan or Rowan, depending what his name is. I can't quite remember. It's one of the two of them, and he starts writing back to her, and kind of the story kind of goes from there. So it's such a beautiful story. Halfway through this book as well, the plot kind of takes a bit of a turn, and I really enjoyed the turn that it was taking. I thought both stories could have been really good if they had been played out that whole way, but I feel like it was a very natural kind of like swift in the other direction. So my thoughts for this one, I said that I loved both the MMC and the FMC, so the male main character and the female main character, and I loved the world, and it had the right amount of political intrigue. I loved the letter writing in this book. I feel like you really got to understand our characters a lot. I also feel like there was a lot of character development from both characters as well, and it took me back to my pen pal days in school when I would have a pen pal like in another part of the country. So I really liked this. This is also the first book in the Letters of Enchantment duology. Ruthless Vows is the second book, and I definitely want to get to that this year because I am just really intrigued to see where the story goes. From what I've heard, you get most of the romance in this book, which is totally fair because I feel like the romance got to a pretty good point. Next up, we have a thriller, The Only One Left by Riley Sager. I got this out from the library and I would love a physical copy of this book. This one was one of my favorite books that I read in 2024. It just had a really good plot. Basically, you are following this chick and she is kind of like an at-home care nurse person, like a live-in nurse. She's kind of at the point where like she doesn't really have any patients to work with anymore, and then her boss assigns her this patient who lives in this house on the cliff. She is the only survivor left and the rest of her entire family was killed. She's kind of like old now, so there is a lot of speculation in this town that she killed her family, but she hasn't ever spoken about it since. No one really knows what happened, and she's like quite sick. So this like at-home live-in nurse, originally she's very hesitant to go there because she believes the rumors are true, but as she kind of goes there, she learns more about this family, and the twists and turns that Riley Sager has put in this book are just incredible. Like, I cannot recommend this book enough. It's not like jump scary, it's more just like thrilling as to what the heck happened on that night. It's more like twisty turvy than like jump scary. So if you're wanting something that kind of like gets your adrenaline going but isn't like jump scary, then I'd recommend this book. My literal thought was, what a time. This book had me hooked and I just wanted to keep reading, so I did not want to put this book down, which is a really, really good sign for me. Some parts I did guess, but the overall twist at the end, my jaw was on the floor. It's one of my favorite thrillers for sure. It's a great book to binge, very twisty-turny. I loved all the characters, like the main characters and the side characters. And I loved how all the small things in the book that are, you think are quite insignificant, they all kind of play into the story somehow, and everything connects at the end. And I just loved that. It was a very like natural way of things connecting as well. It didn't feel like the author was just trying to connect things for the sake of connecting them. Then I also read another thriller, another library book, and that is First Light Winds by Ashley Elston. This book here I also would love to get a copy of. So this one here, you are following this chick who, she's kind of like a spy. Her identity changes all the time. She has different jobs that she is like required to get either like information or to get like a specific item from these people, and she kind of just has to like blend into the society. I don't know if it's legal. It might be legal, it might not be legal, but she also doesn't know who she works for. It's kind of like one of those things that like she's hired by this guy to go and get this information or this thing, and she just has to get it because it pays her bills and it pays her really, really well. She gets assigned to this town to get something from this guy. There's a little bit of a romance that ensues as well, but kind of like has all these like twists and turns in it. Definitely recommend if you're wanting more of a like mystery thriller rather than like a thrilling thriller. So I said that it was such an interesting story and different from anything that I've ever read. Not as adrenaline jumpy as like the Riley Sager book, but gives more mystery vibes. Some parts in the book were predictable, but the overall story I really enjoyed. There was quite a bit going on in the book as well. The plot kind of took like natural kind of turns and things like that. After those two thrillers, I just wanted something really, really lighthearted, so I picked up The Cheat Sheet by Sarah Adams. So I purchased this book like a couple of years ago or something from Kmart, and I felt in the mood to pick up a Sarah Adams book, and I loved this. So in this book you are following Bree and Nathan. Bree is a ballerina who is kind of like struggling to pay her bills. She owns a dance studio, but like the rent is like starting to increase to the point that she can't afford it anymore. And Nathan is a famous, what sport does he play? NFL? Yeah. So he is like very, very like well off, and he's like famous, so it's kind of like the one of us is famous trope. And they are also like high school, I think they're high school friends or like college friends. It's one of the two of those. So they've known each other for a really, really long time, and it's kind of like they both like each other, but they think that the other person could never like them. So there's a lot of like pining and thing for the other person, and I loved this. It's such a like silly goofy time. Also a closed door romance, so no spice. So if you don't like spice in your books and you want a romance book, would highly recommend this. This one was another one of my favorites from last year. I said Nathan is an acts of service guy, and as someone who has a love language of acts of service, I loved him. Like, he just has such a good heart on him. I said I loved both the MMC and the FMC. I think it was a dual point of view. Yeah, it was. And I love that. I love a good dual POV, especially when it's a guy and a girl in a romance book. Very wholesome and cutesy with no spice, and it made me want to read more Sarah Adams books. This book here was also our book club pick for October. and Divine Rivals was our book club pick for September. For October, we picked a book on each other's yearly TBR. So Shelby picked the cheat sheet for me and I picked the flat share for her. Now we will go on to November reads. Daisy Hates by Jessa Hastings. This is the second book in the Magnolia Parks universe, but the first Daisy book. So you get Magnolia and BJ in the first book, and then you get Daisy, Julian, and Christian in the Daisy Hates books. Julian and Daisy are brother and sister, and Christian is kind of like one of Julian's friends. This book here I do actually still have my copy of, but Shelby is currently borrowing it at the moment, who is my sister. I really enjoyed this. I think I'm more of a Magnolia girl than a Daisy girl, but these books, they don't really have a lot of plot. It's mainly just hanging out with these like really super rich, high society London teenagers, basically. It is a very toxic series in terms of the like romances. They're all very like toxic. There is a huge miscommunication trope, but it just works in these books, and they also come from like really rough home lives. They have a lot of like trauma and stuff, so I think that that like plays into how they kind of work in relationships, if that makes sense. Like they haven't really seen a proper functioning relationship. Julian is part of like the most notorious gang in this kind of world. I think he's like the gang leader, or like one of the gang leaders. There's like his gang and then there's another gang, so there is like a bit of illegal activity in this book, but I still really enjoyed it. I said that I loved being back in the Magnolia Parks universe because I read Magnolia Parks for the first time last year. I enjoyed having all the different POVs and hearing about all the different characters. The Assassin's Blade by Sarah J Maas. So I started with Assassin's Blade in the Throne of Glass series. I had Throne of Glass on my 24 books to read in 2024, but I originally had thought I was going to start with Throne of Glass, but I ended up starting with the Assassin's Blade. This one is a prequel, and it's kind of just like a novella of short stories, which I kind of wish that I had known going into this that it wasn't one set story, because I kind of went into it expecting it to be one short story, so I'd get really invested in the story, and then it would suddenly switch and I was like, what? But that is totally my fault for going in with the wrong expectations on what the story would be. There are multiple ways that you can read this series. A lot of people read this book third. This is a YA fantasy series, and you're just following Selena, and she is an assassin, so she goes on different missions. She's tasked with like different things that she has to do for her boss at the Assassin's Guild. I still enjoyed it, even though I didn't realize that it was going to be a bunch of short stories. I loved Selena. I think she's such a badass, but she's also been through a lot of trauma, and I think considering the heart that she has on her with the trauma that she's been through, it also addresses grief in this story as well, so maybe just check the trigger warnings before you go into it. And then I just said I'm excited to read the rest of the series and see where it goes. And then the last book that I read in November is The Ark by Ben Oliver. So this one is the last book in the Loop trilogy. I currently don't have my copy at the moment because my best friend Rachel is borrowing it. I started the Loop in 2023, so I knew in 2024 I really wanted to read the next and last two books, and I'm so happy that I have finished this series. This is a YA dystopian series, and I really enjoy the series. Obviously I can't say too much about the plot of the third book. It was such a great finale to the series. I don't rate my books, obviously I haven't really addressed that, but I either love a book or I don't like a book. I thought this one was on par with the first book, because I definitely enjoyed the first book more than the second book in the series. I said that it had really good pacing and it was very action-packed. I loved all the characters, and it revisits things from both the first and second book and kind of ties them all together in the last book, which I loved because it kept the consistency, and it was nice to like revisit things that we had read about in the previous two books. And it does read quite YA, but I did really enjoy the plot. It's very high stakes, a lot of tension, and this was quite a new series from Ben Oliver. I think it came out in 2020, so I'm really intrigued to see if he's written anything else because I loved it. I would also reread it 100%. Last but not least, we get into my December reads. So I feel like I have been talking for so long. So Thank you so much if you're still here. So all of these December books I have talked about in my Vlogmas from 2024. So if you watched my Vlogmas, this might be a double up. The first book that I picked up in December was a book that I have had on my festive TBR for the past 2, maybe even 3 Christmases. That is Christmas Shopaholic by Sophie Kinsella. So this one here, you are following Becky Bloomwood. This is a book in the Shopaholic series. So Becky Bloomwood is just a shopaholic, and she is just prepping for Christmas. She's prepping to host Christmas. She's buying her Christmas presents. So it's a very festive read. This one was really fast paced as well. I said that I forgot how witty Sophie Kinsella's writing is because it has been years since I've read her writing. She is a British author, so maybe some of the British references went over my head because I'm a Kiwi, I'm a New Zealander. I said that it was very funny and had me giggling. I enjoyed the plot, but I just didn't vibe the side storyline with the guy who wasn't Luke. I didn't feel like that was necessary to the story at all. It kind of just felt like it was placed there as a conflict for the sake of having a conflict, but it really didn't need it. But other than that, really enjoyed the story, and I think it is one that I would reread as well. The Book Club Hotel by Sarah Morgan. So this was a book that I had on my radar for quite a while. This one I actually listened to it as an audiobook, and I really enjoyed the audiobook. I also would love to get a physical copy of this book because I do want to reread it in the future. You are following Hattie, Claudia, Anna, and there's one more. What's the other one? I cannot think of her name. I will pop it on the screen. Hattie is the one who owns the inn, and then Anna, Claudia, and this other chickie are like a friend group who host a book club weekend every year, and so they decide to host it at Hattie's little inn that's kind of like in the mountains for Christmas. I just thought it was a really sweet story. It definitely touches on friendship a lot. This one I said I really enjoyed. It had multiple POVs, so you got a POV from all of the girls, including Hattie, which was really good. It felt very festive and gave girlhood vibes, so if you want to read a book about girlhood, I would recommend this. This one I thoroughly enjoyed all the characters, and there was lots of character development with each and every main character. It does address grief in the story, so definitely check the trigger warnings. I said that I loved the child that was in this book. She was so incredibly cute. It's just like a general fiction Christmas holiday read. I really loved it. It has like a little subplot of romance, but it's not like a main focus at all. Alright, we are back with a battery round 3. Let It Snow by Nancy Thayer. So this one, you were just following this girl who owns a toy shop at Christmas. You're just kind of following her as she develops a romance with this guy who I think is the son of the landlord of this toy shop, I think. This one is just a little like holiday romance book, but this one here I don't have my physical copy anymore. I got it as a library discard. It just wasn't anything like substantial. It was just a very average story in my opinion, and I've got other holiday romance and Christmassy books that I would read over that other one, so I ended up giving it to a little library around my area, and then I've actually been back to that little library since, and the book has been taken by somebody. So I'm hoping that they will enjoy it a lot more than I did. I said that I liked the toy shop scenes, but I wish that there were more of them. I said that it was kind of boring and the relationship felt very insta-lovey, so I didn't really believe in it. I think that also is because the book was really short. Like the book was like just over 250 pages, and I feel like it was a little bit too short, that we couldn't really have a romance develop within that time. I felt not a lot happened, so I decided to donate it. And I remember that we only got like maybe 3 scenes of being in the toy shop, and I wish that we had more in the toy shop itself. A Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens. This one is a classic book. It's also a very short book. It's following Ebenezer Scrooge, and he gets visited by the ghost of Christmas past, present, and future. They have like other names other than that, but they kind of just teach him about the way that he's living his life, and like if he doesn't change his ways, then like people won't really care about him and won't really remember him at all, because he's like this grumpy old man who like works in finance. I said that I enjoyed it. It took a little bit to get used to the language because it's kind of like old school language because it was written in like the 1800s. But I thought it was a good story with good meanings behind it, and it definitely had like a lot of character development and growth as well in the story. Christian non-fiction read, which is Parables by John MacArthur. So in this book here, you are just going through as John MacArthur explains some of the parables that Jesus taught and kind of like what the meanings of those parables were. So if you don't know what a parable is, it's kind of where you like use an illustration to demonstrate a deeper meaning of a story. Really good to like have them broken down and kind of explained and talked through because there are so many parables. It doesn't go through every single parable that Jesus taught. I enjoyed, it was very content heavy, but I enjoyed the parables that were picked and how they were kind of described and explained. Then I listened to another audiobook, Finding Love at the Christmas Market by Joe Thomas. This one again is a holiday romance book, and this one here I don't need a physical copy of. You are following this main girl and she is going with her group of elderly friends because she like works at a retirement village. They are going to scatter their friends' ashes in Germany at Christmas time because their friend was from Germany and she loved Christmas, so they thought it was very appropriate. During the trip as well, our main girl Connie is meeting up with a guy that she met online. It mainly just focuses on like their romance rather than the like scattering of the ashes. So again, obviously addresses grief, but I just felt like it was a very average book. I got this recommendation from Zoe Sugg because she was reading it in one of her Vlogmas videos. Thoughts on this one, I said that it was very festive, but it had a love triangle which felt a little unnecessary given that the main character was in her 30s, and it was very obvious as to like who she would choose. I said that it was a very predictable story. I thought one guy had so many red flags that the female main character ignored. I enjoyed the side characters and the setting was beautiful. If we didn't have the whole like love triangle part of it, and if she was just going with her friends to like go to this town at Christmas and scatter her friend's ashes and she met a guy there, I feel like that would have been a stronger story. I did really enjoy all of the scenes that it talked about baking gingerbread. The final book that I read in 2024, the 61st book that I completed, is this one here. This one is The Christmas Tree Farm by Laurie Gilmore. This is technically the third book in the Dream Harbor series. Dream Harbor is just like the little small town that they live in. It has interconnected romance books, so you can kind of read them in any order. You just get the couples being together in this book. So this is a series that I'm going to be continuing this year. There are also 2 more books that we are getting this year, so I'm really excited for those as well. But this book here, first of all, how stunning is this cover? Just literally gives the most Christmassy vibes. You're following Kira and Bennett. Kira comes from like quite a wealthy family, but she's kind of stepped away from it and just is wanting to kind of make it on her own. So she goes to Dream Harbor and buys this Christmas tree farm. She's not a huge lover of Christmas, like her parents didn't really do a lot for Christmas back in the day, but she enjoys like working at the Christmas tree farm and like giving others like a magical Christmas experience. And then you've got Bennett, who is the brother of one of the girls who owns a business in this book. He kind of like comes and goes from the town, if that makes sense. And you get him with his, is it 2 dogs? 3 dogs that he has? It is just a little like holiday festive romance book. It kind of feels like a very typical Hallmark Christmas movie. So if you like Hallmark cheesy Christmas movies, I feel like you will really like this. This one is the reverse Grumpy Sunshine trope. The girl is grumpy and the guy is the golden retriever. So again, absolutely love that trope. This one here, I said that I really enjoyed it. I loved both the female main character and the male main character. It was definitely very festive. I thought the small town was good, the plot was good, the side characters were good, and it also had a lot of character development and growth as well in this story. I do think it would have been cool if this was dual POV. There are a couple of spice scenes in this book, but the romance is still like fully fleshed out and developed. after the spice scenes as well. It's not just like they have the spice scenes and then that's all consuming in the book. So again, this is like my ideal level of spice. So yeah, definitely if you're looking for a holiday read for Christmas to put on your TBR for this year, then I would definitely recommend this if you haven't read it already. Those are all of the books that I have read in 2024. I really hope that you guys have enjoyed this video. Again, apologies that it has probably been a very long video. If you are here till the end, comment a little book emoji. I would love to know that you've stuck around till the end. If you guys have read any of these books, let me know your thoughts down below, or if you want to read any after watching this video, then I would also love to know that as well. Again, make sure you do go and watch my mid-year reading wrap up. If you guys want to watch more book related videos, I have got an entire playlist called Reading on my channel, so I will leave that playlist down below. I will see you guys in my next video. Bye!